And I'd like to just jump in here because we met just recently about a pilot opportunity, or and I think that some significant changes that are, some ideas that stakeholders or staff may have about what is possible for being more efficient or being better. May not be able to do it across the board at first. We may need to do more pilots. And so as you move into phase 2 in particular, but I don't really care when, I identify where a pilot test of an idea might be useful, and let some of the regional boards be the guinea pigs to test that out.
I think that's an excellent point. I think as more permits incorporate these concepts, we can take those and bring them back and kind of reincorporate it into the checklist so it becomes more standardized and those ideas get out there.
Also as an opportunity for the stakeholder engagement that was hard to get at a theoretical level. As you'll recall, some of the tension when we were doing this, I think we picked very modest things, and yet there was still tension because people are worried. So to the extent you have a site-specific thing where you can be engaging the environmental community and others seeing what you're doing, I think that's going to be very important.
And building on what the vice chair just said in terms of this pilot, we also met on the same issue. And this is a note for myself as well as for John. When we do meet with the TMDL roundtable, it seems to me like that particular concept could be interwoven into the TMDL implementation aspect of this project.
And even broader watershed planning, like to tee off on the last month's activities on the MS4 petition. So it's related to the watershed management planning and TMDL implementation both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. Be continued. Now we move on to item number 7.
And thank you for not taking 3 hours.
Been less than 30 minutes. Yep.
Afternoon, members of the board. I'm Liz Haven with the State Water Board, and I appreciate your time today to hear our report on the transfer of the drinking water program 1 year later. I'm joined by Cindy Forbes, the Deputy Director of the Division of Drinking Water, and Darren Paulhemus of the Division of Financial Assistance, also the Deputy Director. And we have a less than 3-hour presentation for you. Not to stand between everyone and their lunch.
No, if you needed 3 hours, we would give it to you because you're so important.
As you know,
And welcome back from retirement.
Oh, thank you very much, Tam. Board Member Doda. As you know, the transfer of the drinking water program occurred as part of the budget a year ago on July 1st. And it was transferred from the Department of Public Health to the State Water Board. This transfer report is now posted at the State Water Board's website. And the driving factor behind, I believe, the move of the program and so much that we've done since then and continue to do is the human right to water that the legislature passed in 2012 and was signed into law by the governor, saying that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water. And this is so important. It was landmark legislation. I believe California was the first state to pass it. And this is part of our inspiration moving forward. The governor in his water action plan already laid the groundwork for his goal of consolidating water quality programs. Also, in the budget, he said he wanted to propose aligning the state's drinking water program for an integrated organizational structure for water quality. Specifically, the goals of the program transfer, these are numerous. I'll just group them into three kind of categories. One is the integrated water quality regulation, making sure there was a single state agency. Did I just lose this? Okay. Responsible for the entire water quality concerns throughout the hydrologic cycle. The second bin I'd use is the need for financial assistance and the idea of one-stop shopping for disadvantaged communities, since many times they have both drinking water and clean water, wastewater needs. And the last, I think, is a more comprehensive water planning strategy, including water recycling and trying to facilitate that. And this last group, I think, has really been accelerated by the drought efforts that have come about in the last year. More about that in a minute. Oops. So in preparation for the transfer of the program, the administration convened the Drinking Water Reorganization Task Force, and that met, it was a group of about 30 stakeholders who met intensively between October and December of 2013. I wanted to again acknowledge their hard work because we threw a lot of material at them. They digested it, asked us a lot of hard questions, and ended up, I think, making the transfer of the program more effective through their input. After reviewing that input, the administration, specifically Cal EPA and the Health and Human Services Agency, released in March a program transition plan, and that set out the vision for the transfer. If you think of that as the before document, then the transfer report that is for today's item is really the after, and we tried to use the same kind of structure and topics to make it easy to compare. So the administration also put in a lot of hard work to prepare for the transfer. The governor's office sponsored a group of 14 sub-teams of Department of Public Health and Water Board staff. These folks worked really, really hard to ensure a smooth transfer of the program. And on the next page, this slide shows those sub-teams. I want to particularly call out that top row. Facilities in the Division of Administrative Services worked extremely hard and is still working to try to get everybody the office locations and so forth that they needed. They made sure that the people who had new supervisors at the water board, for example, in the legal office and the IT office, came over immediately. They were there within a month over here in this building. Similarly, in Division of Administrative Services, the accounting and budget staff, and Bill Damian in particular was the one who wrote the BCP. And in accounting, they had to build an entire database just to make sure that July 1st we could start sending out invoices without this old database crashing. They did a yeoman's job along with staff at the Division of Drinking Water to make that happen. Human resources, my personal goal for the transfer was that everyone got paid, and they made it happen. They transferred over all of the staff documentation and handled all of the labor relations issues, which were numerous. And last but not least on that top line is the Division of Information Technology. These folks really, really worked hard. Specifically the weekend before the transfer, they moved over everyone's email so that Monday morning they had email service. They've been working since then to transfer over all the servers and innumerable needs of the Division of Drinking Water, and I would just particularly want to call them out. All these other sub-teams worked hard too, and I think laid the groundwork for a successful transfer. So as we said, the enactment of the budget was the prompt, And we had Cindy Forbes, our deputy director, was hired and in place on day one of the transfer. And our assistant deputy director, Karen Larson, who's here in the room, was in place later in July. And all of that made for a very smooth functioning. And I wanted to especially mention that the statewide programs are being consolidated here at headquarters under the transfer of the program. And Cindy and Karen have worked to make sure that the functions are now headquartered at the Cal EPA building. I think that's helping a lot. This is from the transition plan. It shows the proposed structure, and this is essentially how it worked out. In the center, you see the Division of Drinking Water, Cindy with her 3 branches. And on the right, you see under the Chief Deputy Director, you see the Division of Financial Assistance on the left, and sure enough, the Drinking Water SRF, State Revolving Fund, is now co-managed under the Division of Financial Assistance, as is Operator Certification. They're both co-managed together. And also the GAMA relates to the Drinking Water Source Assessment Program under the Division of Water Quality. And I should mention ELAP as well is under the Program Management Branch, and also recycled water has been consolidated under that Program Management Branch at Division of Drinking Water as well. So I wanted to just go through a few successes. I feel like this is something we could go on and on about, and the report has a number of successes in it, but I wanted to highlight a few. In the financial assistance arena, a very significant step was taken through the board's adoption of the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund policy. Through the hard work of Ann Hartridge and Michael Loffer and OCC, the language transferring the program included provisions that allowed for the sunset of some very restrictive statutes and regulations on the revolving fund once the board adopted the policy. And DFA worked hard to make that happen, and you folks approved it, and sure enough, the board is now able to operate without as many restrictions on the use of the drinking water SRF. Thanks to new legislation under the Division of Financial Assistance, we now have the Office of Sustainable Water Solutions, and I saw Julie Rosardo in the back of the room. She leads that up for us, and that group has both drinking water and clean water responsibilities, and they're really our one-stop shopping folks for disadvantaged communities. Also, the Division of Financial Assistance has used the FAST system. That's the database that allows for online access or online application for financial assistance, and that's been a tremendous improvement as well. And prior to the transfer of the program, EPA had required a work plan for the unliquidated obligations from the drinking water SRF. So Darren and his folks inherited that and are continuing to work through and meet the requirements of that. Another success has been the drought financial assistance, and Division of Financial Assistance has been providing that along with other agencies for drought-stricken communities. This is a picture courtesy of the Visalia Times-Delta, which had a nice article about the fact that a city called, or a town, I'm not sure if they're actually a city, but they're in Tulare. They're a rather small community, but they are disadvantaged, and they'd struggled without good water for a long time, and Division of Financial Assistance was able to get them a well drilled very quickly, much to the appreciation of the community. Also, Division of Drinking Water has many successes under their belt. There is recent legislation I'll touch on again at the very end, but it allows the division to essentially require consolidation or extension of service to disadvantaged communities who are not receiving safe, affordable, or safe and adequate drinking water. So this addresses both drought and areas where the water doesn't meet standards. That was an idea that Cindy Forbes had when she first came on board, and sure enough, here it is. Now we just have to implement it. Another success has been the Transition Advisory Group. This was an outgrowth of a recommendation from that Drinking Water Transition Task Force I mentioned earlier. And this group consists of a number of key stakeholders. They meet regularly with Cindy and her staff and Darren and provide input to help with the transition as it continues to move forward. The Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, ELAP, is really being revitalized under the leadership of Cindy, Karen, and also Christine Sotelo, the manager who was hired for that right before the transfer. And they have convened, she's here, good. In our audience is mostly our star performers here. At any rate, Christine has worked with SWRCB, with whom you're all familiar, to oversee an expert panel to give us expert recommendations, and some of those have even already been implemented, even though the report isn't final yet. And then the division brought with them an online reporting tool that had been developed, I believe, at CDPH that allowed for the water systems to provide the boundaries of their systems under their EHIB program. And that is now being used in our drought reporting. So that's another example of the kind of synergies that we have with this transfer. And also the curtailment compliance orders. The Division of Drinking Water has more robust enforcement capabilities in the area of curtailment than water rights, or at least more readily exercised, as I understand it. So Cindy and her folks worked with Barbara Evoy, the Deputy Director of Water Rights, and her staff to help issue compliance orders. I should mention I have Cindy and Darren here in case there are any questions you have on those specifics. Another big success of the Division of Drinking Water was the submittal of the Safe Drinking Water Plan prior to the actual deadline of June 15th. By skin of our teeth. I do want to give a proper acknowledgement to Department of Public Health on this, specifically Dave Spath, who was the lead author drafting up a very robust document for us to start from. However, this document benefited from the workshops that were held throughout the state under Karen Larson's leadership, and the changes that were incorporated made the document a more robust piece of legislation, or not legislation, a robust plan that will serve until it's time for the next one in 5 years. We could go on and on. This is the last slide of successes, just to...
Great, are you kidding? Great.
The underground injection control program is one where Cindy and her staff are coordinating with Vicki Whitney and her staff in the Division of Water Quality to try to make sure that the protected aquifers you just heard a lot about are protected from underground injection as well. And
I'd say that's yet another reason why I should have connected those two. That would be another high point reason why consolidation made sense. I've talked about source to tap and all of that, but big deal.
yes, and I should have even thrown sustainable groundwater management, although, you know, we still have lots to be done, obviously, on that, but Cindy and her folks have been involved with that as well. Next bullet was the fact that the dischargers some dischargers have either through enforcement or through settlement agreements agreed to supply interim drinking water to disadvantaged communities that are affected by the contamination. That's something that has benefited from the cooperation of the Division of Drinking Water. We've been able to get some hydrogeologist assistance from the regional boards to the Division of Drinking Water. This one's near and dear to my heart. Going the other direction, the Division of Drinking Water has a great deal of emergency response experience, and that assistance has flowed the other direction to the regional board and state board to help us make our emergency response procedures and manual more robust. And I would say that the Napa earthquake, a month and a half after the transfer, was a testing of the transfer of the program and really attested to the hard work done in advance to make sure our emergency response went smoothly, which it did. The recycled water group is under the Division of Drinking Water, Division of Drinking Water, and includes the water quality functions and permitting, so that has established a one-stop shop for recycled water matters, setting the stage for eventual further indirect potable reuse, potentially someday direct potable reuse. And then the regional board has coordinated with the Division of Drinking Water. I used the example of the Central Coast, which has a groundwater recharge permit with Cambria that Cindy and her staff worked with Region 3 and their staff to get that fast-tracked. And then finally, there's joint training that has occurred almost since month 1 of the transfer, and this continues. I know the drinking water general permit was developed between Division of Water Quality and Division of Drinking Water. They conducted training together throughout the state for stakeholders, and we're training ourselves. And I know next week there's going to be GeoTracker Gamma database training for the drinking water staff to see what a powerful tool they have available with that. So in closing, I wanted to mention that, of course, this is an ongoing story. We face challenges and we have opportunities. Highest on the list, practically speaking, is the fees and the need to address the funding gap. When the program transferred, we all thought that we had costed it out properly and that we were getting adequate budget to support the existing staff, but it turned out that that was not the case and that there is a funding gap in order to fund the existing staff. And so that is a big to-do list for Cindy and also the Division of Administrative Services moving forward, and especially with trailer bill language that authorized the eventual change of how we do billing for drinking water. I'm touching again on this new drought water system consolidation authority that was passed through the budget trailer bills this year. With drought as our new normal, it's really important that the Division of Drinking Water have the authority to require an extension of service in the case of drought, or to require consolidation of systems if appropriate and if the funding is available. And if they take a number of steps, which will ensure that there's public discourse and ability for input and proper steps are taken by the LAFCOs, et cetera. So that's a very important challenge, and Cindy and Darren and I have already met with Tom Howard, our executive director, to begin planning out the implementation of that new authority. And finally, as you know, we are pursuing with the governor's office an initiative to provide affordable, safe drinking water for disadvantaged communities, circling back to the human right to water. This, I think, is a lot of what this is all about. And we are continuing to work with stakeholders and legislative staff on how we might move forward on that. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention and invite your questions to either me or Darren or Cindy. Thank you.
Go ahead.
My first question is for Darren. Do you have, or do you and Cindy and Liz have a plan for consolidation? What will that look like, and when might we see it?
Still working on it. So some initial steps are, well, let me back up a step. So I've ordered all of my staff, when they're looking at facilities plan reviews, to make sure that consolidation was looked at, that they look on the horizon, so that we don't pass over one here in the interim while we're identifying communities that are coming before us. And there's been quite a few consolidations either underway or funded in the past, so this isn't like a brand new thing. It's just a new tool to help it along. Cindy's crew actually has the first shift on helping us identify where consolidation potentials might be. And so they're working on a spreadsheet, and she can talk about that. We're working on a map that shows us where communities are close together, so we'll have that as a tool. And my crew will go through and try to identify, certainly we're funding potential consolidations through our LIFA grants that we gave out. So almost all of those are contemplated consolidations that are in the works. and we have other ones that we know of from our side. So once we get all that rigged together, we're going to shift through it, and I'll let, Cindy was the one that came up with how to pick which ones we might attack first, so I'll let her do that.
Yeah, as Darren explained, it seemed obvious that the most logical consolidations are those of service areas that are very close together. So we have a spreadsheet that's being completed. It's been sent to all the districts. It's also been sent out to all our LPA partners, asking for them to look through their inventories, and especially where there are systems that are not complying with drinking water standards. Those are going to be our initial targets, proximity. And so we also are putting together lists of community water systems and schools that only have a single well, because those seem very vulnerable. It's not a matter of will the well go out, it's more of when will the well go out. And so it'd be really a good idea to know how far they are from a service area of another system, that we might get some redundancy and some resiliency for them.
Well, as a follow-up to that, Darren and I very briefly met not too long ago with someone who has done some work on consolidation, particularly in the community outreach aspect of it, which is so important to make it, to help people move from being suspicious to embracing the idea. And so I'm hoping that as you put your budgets together for this, that there is a substantial emphasis at the front end, not at the back end, on this kind of community outreach.
Absolutely. I think the lessons we've learned a lot with dealing with the small communities just kind of come into fold even more when you're talking about a governance change and joining a larger community. And there's a lot to be said about approaching, a lot of people think of the small disadvantaged communities as the helpless one and the one that should just go along with it. But there's a lot of cultural, social, historical perspectives and respect that need to be paid in approaching them about it as well, because we have to work with both parties and work through what may be a long history of tumultuous times and get past those and get to a productive point for both of them that they can both move forward with. So we have the incredible luxury right now of the technical assistance availability from Prop 1, and I expect to be using all of that as fast as we can, especially in addressing this particular thing. So I think the timing, you couldn't have asked for better, really, to align those two components and have that resource there. And then all of our technical assistance partners and the other partners we work with in the EJ Water community, they're probably going to hate it when I start calling them, because I'm going to ask them to do more and more and hopefully help them along this lines, because we're going to need their help, seriously, to address all of this and approach these communities in the right way and have the right messaging and work with them. So definitely.
My last question is to Cindy, and partly it's a comment, it's a thank you for your staff who have reached out to the regional boards and gotten to know them and starting to develop even stronger relationships. Than many of them had those relationships before, but at something of an arm's length. And now I think it's really moving in a good direction, and I hope we will continue that in the future as a partnership.
Thank you. Yeah, I personally have appreciated the opportunity to meet all the executive officers at the MCC meetings, and I've been to speak to a number of the boards. I actually am going down to the LA board this Thursday and meeting with them. And as we move forward, I just think that there will be opportunities for us to tag team with them and deal with localized problems. I think it's going to be different in every region, and so we have to make sure we understand what problems we're trying to solve. But I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities as we work with the board. The droughts, I think, shining a light on a lot of contaminated groundwater areas, and we're going to have to tag team to get those sites cleaned up, because public water systems are going to have to be revisiting the need to use groundwater supplies.
Okay, I've got a couple. One in follow-up to Board Member Spivey Weber's on outreach. So with the consolidation language in the trailer bill, and then also a proposal that's floating around, what do you see as sort of the best method to get information out that will actually spur some movement in light of the fact that we now have this sort of backstop authority?
I'll kick that off and say that one thing that we're putting in the draft implementation plan is to send letters to those that look like they're likely candidates from their proximity, they're meeting all the criteria, and just put them on notice that we may not get to you tomorrow, and this is not your official notification required by the legislation, but you're on our list and you have every opportunity to voluntarily consolidate. And I want to mention one thing that the consolidation trailer bill did was provide liability relief for consolidating the receiving system. And that extends not just for the mandatory ones, but also for voluntary consolidation. So the letter can point out that that barrier has been removed. And then after that, we would start with outreach, probably more on a system-by-system basis. I'll turn it over to Darren.
Yeah, I see it as we'll have a list of folks that we want to try to actually sell on the concept first, because I think it's to their benefit, it really is, and hopefully we'll make that demonstration and get them on board with it up front, and then move from there. And then, of course, if we get to a stuck spot, and can't work through it voluntarily, then we can, figure out a way to use the statutes to our benefit to address the human right to water in the end and make sure that state constitutional requirement gets met.
And then the next question is on Sigma. So if you could talk about maybe two different examples. Example where you find that you're interfacing well with some local efforts that are already underway, either the Division of Drinking Water or local water systems, and also any examples where you find that that integration has yet to occur and maybe is met with some resistance by those that want to be in charge of Sigma.
I have to say, so far, I haven't seen resistance or success. I think it's too new in the process. I don't think drinking water has been actively involved in many of those discussions. I think there are certainly lots of possibilities moving forward where we can encourage better regional planning and management of groundwater, but we haven't started down that path or been even asked to participate yet.
I'll just add that at the state level, we did participate with the Eric Ekdahl and the ORP folks, and more importantly, because they have a bigger role right now, is the Department of Water Resources, and their point people on Sigma did ask to meet with us. So we had sort of a state level kickoff, but I think what Cindy's pointing out is that at the local level, it's going to take some time to be playing out.
Well, thank you. I can't say enough about how proud I am of everybody's efforts here. Thanks to everyone that have presented, but also those in the room. And they've really made true on the anticipated successes of our combination and all the synergies. I could go on and on about that, but actually my questions relate a little more to the challenges, and just want to be honest about some of the challenges we've had. First, you mentioned the curtailment benefit and the Division of Water Rights and DDW working together, and building on this conversation we're having about consolidation, you kind of glossed over it. So the mechanism was that there isn't enough water to meet public health and safety based on, say, a single or a couple of sources of water that weren't reliable or had public health issues. Is that right? So there was a moratorium on water service connections implemented in how many communities or water service districts?
I think the compliance orders were issued to 22 separate community water systems, and they were advised that their primary source of water had been curtailed by the Division of Water Rights. So we immediately put them on a connection moratorium. You can't continue to take more water if you're not entitled to any. Additionally, if they weren't individually metered, they have to come in with a plan to install meters, even if they're not currently mandated to do so by existing state laws. Probably the biggest challenge that we gave them was they had to prepare a water supply planning study so they could figure out what they were going to do if the drought continued, which was very good prognostication since they probably are curtailed this year also. So we are working through all of those submittals and making sure that, you know, they have their ducks in a row and are going to figure out what they're going to do if it doesn't start raining.
So there were efficiencies that we realized through using an administrative tool in lieu of some other tools we had within Water Rights Division. And along those lines, would you say that some of those communities might be candidates in this outreach and then eventual follow through potential consolidation? Or, I mean, there's only 20 odd, and will there be more this year, do you think?
Well, I think the easier question to answer is, will there be more this year? That answer is yes. And we have been meeting with the Division of Water Rights pretty routinely to get lists of their new curtailments. And so we're sifting through those to identify impacted public water systems. The ability to look at some of these curtailed systems and whether or not they're in close enough proximity to another system to be a candidate for consolidation. I have to honestly say we haven't looked at that. I suspect there might be some potential, but most of the ones that received the curtailment compliance orders last year were very small systems. They're not very big at all.
Fairly isolated, yes. Okay, thank you. And then in the challenges category, I've heard that, you know, from in meeting with district office staff, that really there was some pain in the transition because some key staff, skilled staff level, you know, more senior staff had to be let go. And I was wondering, just, you know, are we making plans to sort of backfill and do an honest assessment of the capacity of our district offices moving forward? Or I just want to get a sense from the district office perspective on how the transitions have gone on a personnel level basis and if we have adequate staffing.
So I'm not aware of anyone being let go except
I'm
for...
sorry about the let go.
Yeah,
There weren't enough staff positions to
That's true, and
support all of the staff positions we had in these district offices.
Yeah, and I think that was a historic problem that we inherited because a number of their positions in the district offices were supported by proposition funding that was limited term, and so as those positions expired, the division offices or district offices were not able to refill. I did want to say one thing though, which is that there probably was some disruption due to the separation of the financial assistance function from the district office. And I think that that's something that's still playing out. But in order to try to replicate the success that the water boards have had for many years now in terms of providing financial assistance, we did do that, you know, move several of the functions over under Division of Financial Assistance. And some of those folks are here at headquarters. I believe there may be a few still in the district offices, but that is an area where I think there's still work to be done. And I know Cindy and Darren meet regularly to coordinate on that and get the roles correct. You know, there's a lot of different ways you could tease out those two functions, and they obviously have to work very closely together going forward. But I think that's been a source of some discussion, some concerns that Cindy and Darren are still working out.
Like Liz says, we meet regularly on that, and I keep hearing about it. We're sensitive to it. We want to try to address the issue. It'd be interesting to hear Cindy's point of it, but my take on it is it's been really just reaction to change, and nothing fatal's been found in the switch yet. It's a little new procedures, and you got to pick up the phone differently or whatever, but I still see the eventual benefit to everybody, and once we get past the this is different phase, we'll be all working much better together.
Well, I agree the devil's in the details. And what I would say is change is hard, and it's really hard, I think, for the local DDW staff to hand over what they have, what has been their turf all along. And it's hard to entrust the staff from DFA to do the right things. And we just feel so compelled to share with them all our local course knowledge, to use a golf expression. You know, they don't have embedded in them some of the political sensitivities, the water quality issues, and some of the stuff that we have dealt with for a number of years. And I think we're going to work through it, and where we find some fatal flaws, we'll fix it when and if it happens.
No, thank you for that discussion. There was, you know, I hear such positive things, though, generally from all perspectives on this. It was interesting to come across a specific case where some communities under the old DPH financial assistance for disadvantaged communities were expecting a certain, maybe even a principal forgiveness arrangement or a low interest rate. And then when we switched to the SRF to DFA, they were given a higher interest rate. But of course, again, devil's in the details. But for the most part, I've heard the positive on the customer service and everything else. How do we deal with some of these, you know, I don't know, want to say promises, but indications under the previous program and then moving forward into this program?
Yeah, there's several of those questions that are before us now. Each one's a bit unique in its own circumstance. I think generally speaking, or broadly speaking, there was a expectation of a lot higher subsidy under CDPH, and we tend to take a little bit more of approach of a means testing, and that there's a fair portion that every community should be paying. Certainly when you're disadvantaged, that's much lower than others and higher than others. And a lot of the communities that we're struggling with were right on the bubble of the 80% disadvantaged community line, and they float above and below that line based on when you pull the stats and whether we were in recession when they got their last financial assistance from CDPH, and now they're not, and they're above. And so a lot of them look back and say, well, I got the first phase of this project, you know, can't I get all the next 12? Or so it'll be challenging. I'm taking them all very serious, and we're going back in the history books and the files to make sure that, you know, any promises that were made in writing and, you know, kind of in that fashion are honored. But to date, what I've finally mostly discovered is that they're impressions that people took away from conversations or kind of just the way things had happened. And so I'm not through all of them yet, but yes, there are a few of those percolating out there.
Part of the challenge of transition. So anyway, thank you for those discussions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was fascinating. I mean, you know, consolidation and fees and financial assistance are all significant issues that the program is facing. But I wanted to take this opportunity to confess to the rest of my colleagues that I think I've managed to rope the Division of Drinking Water into helping me out with another ulterior motive, and that is the idea of going paperless. So one of the things that I've been talking with the Division of Drinking Water staff about is doing some kind of a pilot to look at how, you know, portable devices such as tablets could be used, especially by field staff, to increase productivity and to reduce, you know, time that gets involved in paperwork and data submission and report generation and that sort of thing. And so I look forward to hearing back from the division, recognizing that, you know, there's a lot of other challenges, especially for DIT, in order to help out with this pilot. But I'm looking forward to this being hopefully the start of something to look at productivity enhancement through the use of tools. As you all know, I can't do without my tool. So I think the rest of the world should be the same.
Member Doda, just to mention that the Division of Water Rights and the inspections that they're conducting during the drought are using tablets in the field. They acquired them with the drought funding, and they are using those specifically to document their inspections.
And so what are the measures that they're using? If they are using those tool tablets, I would imagine there hopefully will be some benefits with respect to time saving, productivity. Are they tracking those things? And is that will there be some data generated from that effort that could also help enhance the Division of Drinking Water's pilot?
Let me talk to Barbara and John about what they in fact are tracking with the use of the tablets and whether there's some more formalized information that we could bring back to you to document the effectiveness.
Right? My goals.
I think that fits in well with that managerial consolidation that we're talking about in terms of increased efficiencies and sort of the circuit rider that goes out and about on occasion, but for the most part is doing remote sensing. So I could see it all integrating real well. Good suggestion.
There were issues with the compliance system or the electronic system for permitting, and would there be a nexus with improved technology with that issue?
I don't think I downplayed the seriousness of how bad our database and IT systems were when we came over, and the state board's IT folks, along with some dedicated engineers in drinking water, have done a bang-up job in improving many of our what were our legacy programs, and we're moving over, migrating into new systems. Obviously, every one of those tools helps us down the road, and permitting is something that we have a big backlog on because every new well or water supply and every new treatment has to have an amended permit. So, yeah, we would certainly be able to use information gathered during an inspection. We'd just import it and be able to drop it into our permits.
You actually answered a number of the questions I had, even in your presentation, let alone the excellent questions that have come up. I just have a couple of them. Proposition 1, you referenced it, Darren, gives us some great, not only technical assistance tools, but real money to make a difference on the ground in many of these communities. Do you have, you don't need to give me an answer right now, but I'd like to get a sense of how much more we're going to be able to do than we would have been able to do otherwise. And then this dovetails in with the ASDW effort where we're working with the administration to actually propose, I think, what is sort of a heavy lift in terms of not just some changes we might need, but also a stable funding source to really implement the human right to water. And that is, a top priority, but also, not without controversy and not that simple. And so as you're doing all this incredible foundation work that was essential to the transfer, and I've done a lot of organizational changes, planning and implementation and, being the shoulder to cry on and social worker as I went through them, but I am totally impressed with what you all have done, both, intellectually and with humanity to find the best in both and the synergies and be candid with the controversy. I'm actually blown away by how well it's gone and utterly delighted by it, but I think all of us stand here ready to help you with anything you need. So don't ever hesitate to amplify and tell us what the challenges are, straight up, because we want it to succeed and we don't want you to have to do it with your hands tied behind your back. So right now, happily with Prop 1, we've got this new infusion of funding, and so I want to see a lot more civils and the like, across the board where we're going to be able to give, it's, again, we're doing the foundational work, but in a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to have great numbers that will make Tam so happy, as well as the rest of us, where we're actually going to have, we're going to know that there are communities and people across California that have clean, safe, affordable water to drink who didn't before, which it's hard to imagine anything that is better. So tell me how to think about this timing-wise? I mean, I would think it's first things first and all that, but you do have all this money, so
Yeah, we have all this
throw it
money.
away. So temper my expectations or
No, I think
set them up?
so I'm going to do both. We're going to be bringing to you the drinking water, safe drinking water SRF IUP combined with the Prop 1 drinking water funds, I believe your first meeting in August. So we're working through all the comments we got on all the public meetings we wrapped up a couple weeks ago and pulling all that together, making the great changes that were suggested by our folks in that. And in concept, what I kind of directly to your question of what will we be able to do with Prop 1 that we wouldn't have been able without it. So let's say without it, we had just the SRF, which is loan money. And we're really trying to set it up so that every project that gets Prop 1 funds was a project that would not have happened without it. That SRF would not have been able to do it, so that there's this perfect, smooth transition where the instant they can't deal with the financing because they're disadvantaged or small or the capital improvements are too big they're facing, that's when Prop 1 would fill that gap. Now, of course, we can conceptualize that in a perfect world and it won't be exactly like that, but that's certainly the goal we're striving for. The part that concerns me the most is that a lot of these small communities, even when they get to the point of 100% Prop 1 grant, I'm going to still have a trouble giving them funding because they will face the fact that they simply cannot afford to keep the electricity on to run the treatment system we just built. And that, as you know and have testified when we were working through the budget process before the legislature, is kind of the big scary. Every chance I get, I keep saying this, and I said it down at Hanford with Dee Dee and folks to keep reminding people, they want to think that Prop 1 solved the problem, and it didn't. It solved a lot of problems that we will be able to use it dramatically for, but until we figure out through the ASDW and others possible methods of how to fund the operation and maintenance of some of these really small ones. The ones that are left after we can't consolidate them, because there will be plenty of those, certainly I think we can sweep a lot of benefit when we get through that exercise, but there'll still be some that are left that they're too far from somebody or there's physical barriers that we can't overcome money-wise, and so we'll be faced with that. So.
And we'll need funding in order to make consolidation work, because that's also a part of the legislation, right? So
Right.
I know in Prop 1, there's an incentive for consolidation that gives them a bonus, so hopefully that helps a little bit, but part of that, there's the barrier removal, but there's also that tool, and it seems to me we need ASDW to be able to actually complete the set there, right?
And Darren, I was surprised to hear you give the figure, I don't remember what it was, but over the life of a loan, the percentage of that goes to O&M.
Yeah, a lot of
is
people,
really
so it's
high.
just a rule of thumb, when you're looking at a life of a project, how much is the initial capital investment? We all fret over that initial capital amount to build the system. But in the lifetime operating cost of most systems, that's 10 to 15% of the entire cost. It's actually, look at it that way, it's kind of like you shouldn't have been worried about that at all. You kind of need to be worried about how you're going to pay your employees and your chemical bills and your electricity and your billing system and all that stuff, which adds up over time to be a much greater thing than this little increment of capital improvement.
But I think that is the place where the tablet approach or other kinds of, we don't have to consolidate completely. We can consolidate treatment. We can consolidate.
When we say consolidate, we mean all of those,
I know.
and definitely will be funding just managerial consolidations. There's incredible benefit in that as well. We worked with Liz on the ASDW of having, maybe finding some where we bring 5 or 6 small communities together that can't physically connect but can form one governmental local entity that can benefit. So yeah, there's a lot of permutations. There's going to be different solutions in different areas naturally, and we're open to definitely pursuing all of those.
All that great work.
I do
Building,
have one follow-up. One follow-up, and that's for Karen. Karen, I hope that you will be able to work with Cindy, probably with Cindy and Liz, to make sure that Department of Water Resources and our groundwater unit have worked on a timeline as to when the Division of Drinking Water field folks should be engaged and how they should be engaged in SGMA, because I know they will be engaged, but we need to be anticipating how that will actually work.
Certainly, as the department begins to roll out its outreach meetings and workshops on the development of the guidelines behind the sustainability plans, I think that will be an appropriate time. And so I'll ask Eric Ekdahl to set up some time with Dave Gutierrez at DWR, and we'll bring Cindy in and start talking about how we can integrate that piece.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to working with you on that next phase. Pretty amazing. Thank you. Oh, Mr. Garabedian, did you put in a blue card?
I didn't.
Oh, you need to do that, but go ahead.
I'll do that.
Just do it after.
Michael Garabedian, a question on my own here that I last explored with anybody at the board at the advisory committee to the potable expert. So that was early last year, and I may be out of date. And the question, and maybe some wrinkles of it, has to do with the survey of recycled water use. The one that I was last online was I guess a survey that I think one of the board members participated in, and it seems to me it's rather important that we actually have the facts of what water is being recycled and to what uses it's being put and so forth. So the question is there now, as part, I didn't see it in the materials today, though I haven't read all of them. I wonder if there is a regulatory or pending legislative requirement to do that survey of recycled use, make it mandatory, know what percentage of response there is, because I understand it was voluntary, and we really don't have the figures of what recycled water is being used and what at all, totally, and to what purpose it's being put. And it's hard for me to grasp that a lot of people have a lot of goals, and the legislature and the board does, about what should we be doing with recycled water when we really don't know what we're doing now.
Well, I think I can jump in here because it touches on many things, really not the Division of Drinking Water per se as much, although they're there. The financial assistance, Dan, in financial assistance is working with Department of Water Resources Division, their Conservation Division, Recycled Water Division, and they are planning to have an updated survey on how much recycled water is being used early next year. However, Tom Howard is checking in with staff as to whether or not this could be made mandatory in permits, which will probably touch the Division of Drinking Water. That hasn't been done yet. It's not really part of this report, but these things are being looked at, and I think if you identify yourself for the public, we can certainly make sure that you're kept in the loop as to what's going on. But right now, we won't have a new survey until next year.
At this point, it's just known to be voluntary response.
At this point, it's staff generated. It's kind of voluntary, but it's staff generated. But I hope we can move to it being mandatory, not voluntary, because it's too expensive to just have to generate this thing by staff every few years. And then it's not really that useful, actually, when you are dealing with 2009 data, which is what we're dealing with right now.
Thank you.
Great. That's Michael Garabedian, and if you'll fill out the blue card with your contact info, we'll make sure to keep you in the loop. I didn't even know about that, actually. Interesting. All right. Okay, that was useful. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Garabedian. We'll now take a lunch break as we do our closed session. we think 45 minutes to an hour, so let's say in an hour. Possible we would be done earlier for our last two items. And 15 minutes to go get food for folks? Okay, so 20 minutes to 2 in room 230. Okay.